Moving with pets can be a stressful time for both owners and animals. Of course, every pet is different, so I'm not saying this is the right way to move with a cat, but I wanted to share what worked for us and how we made the journey as stress-free as possible for Freya and for us. Before I explain how we prepared for the move, I should probably introduce Freya. Freya wasn't always our cat. She was dumped in the woods near where we lived during a particularly harsh Dutch winter. And of course most cats would have run away, but when I called, "Hey kitty kitty," she came running straight into the house and she's been with us ever since. We were incredibly lucky that our landlords agreed we could keep her. The local shelters were completely full, and even though I was volunteering at one of them, there simply wasn't any room. One suggestion was to put her back where we'd found her, but considering it was like -10 at the time, I didn't feel that was really something I could do. And of course, because of this start in life, she's never really liked travelling by car. And prior to this move, the only time she'd travelled in the car was to the vet. Moving a pet to another country involves quite a bit of paperwork. For Sweden, Freya needed a valid rabies vaccination, and it has to be given at least 3 weeks before you enter the country. She also needed her pet passport updating, and of course we'd already had her microchipped when we first rescued her, but that's essential as well. And one thing that we really wanted to avoid was putting her through a stressful car journey to the vet just a couple of weeks before she had to spend over 10 hours in the car. So instead, we arranged for the vet to come to our house. They gave her the required vaccinations, updated her passport and checked everything was in order. It cost us about €150 for the home visit and the price of the vaccinations. But, for us it was money well spent because Freya stayed in a relaxed and familiar surroundings and wasn't stressed at all. Looking back, I think the biggest thing we did to prepare her was buying a large dog crate instead of a standard small cat carrier. And about a month before we moved, every single meal was fed inside the crate. I played the treat game, throwing them into the crate as well, so that she got really used to it. And then by the time moving day arrived, it wasn't something scary that she'd never seen before. It was her own little apartment. She had her bed, her food bowl, her litter tray, and she was completely comfortable going in there on her own. So we didn't have to chase her around the house trying to catch her on moving day or anything. Now, moving ourselves turned out to be just as complicated as moving Freya. We'd lived in the Netherlands for almost 5 years, so we had a house full of furniture, appliances, and, everything that comes with everyday life. Originally, Lolly took a car full of our belongings to Sweden to be stored by the landlord we thought we were going to rent from. And then, just 7 days before we moved, everything changed. If you watched my previous video, you'll know that the landlord simply stopped responding and completely disappeared. And that meant we suddenly had to rethink everything. And, we couldn't leave Freya home alone while taking our belongings to Sweden. So Lolly had to make the journey by himself with the van while I stayed behind with her. To help make the trip a bit more manageable, he drove to the Travemünde ferry port and took the overnight ferry to Trelleborg. Unloaded everything at our new house in Sweden. Thank goodness for the farmer that saved us from being homeless. And then he returned the same way before driving back to the Netherlands. And we were so lucky to have fantastic friends in the Netherlands who lent us a mattress so that we didn't have to sleep on the tile floor. And because, of course, all our stuff had now moved to Sweden. I honestly don't know how we'd have managed those final few days without them. On the morning we finally left, our friends helped us load the last few things into the car while Freya was safely settled in her little apartment in the back seat. I filmed one final video of the house before we left as evidence of condition of the property. The landlords had promised to come for the handover several different times, but had never shown up. And with such a long journey ahead of us, we simply couldn't wait any longer. And as it turned out, we never heard from them again. Freya wasn't particularly impressed with the first hour or so in the car, and she spent quite a while telling us exactly what she thought of the situation, before eventually settling down in her favourite bed and looking thoroughly annoyed with us and the whole thing. But apart from one huge traffic jam that forced us onto smaller roads, the journey itself was surprisingly uneventful. I was a little surprised that she didn't want to eat any of the Icelandic dried fish that we'd saved for her, that was her favourite food. But she did want to eat one of those liquid tube treat things. I think they call them churros in America. Or churro. Anyway, you know the things. I'll put a picture up of the one we used. And that she would eat, so that was a relief. People sometimes ask why we didn't use the overnight ferry when we were travelling with Freya. And the simple answer is that although, it did work fantastically for Lolly travelling alone, taking a cat in a large crate through busy ferry terminals and crowded corridors would have probably caused Freya far more stress than simply staying in the car with us. Of course, there is the unexpected bonus of driving the whole way, is you get to see the Öresund Bridge into Sweden, and that was pretty special. And then we reached the Swedish border. The customs officers stopped us and asked to see our passports. So we handed them over, only to discover they weren't interested in ours at all. They just wanted Freya's passport. They checked her rabies vaccination dates, looked into the back seat to make sure she was comfortable in her little apartment, and then waved us on our way. Apparently there is a real problem with people transporting animals in terrible conditions, so it was really reassuring to see that they take animal welfare so seriously. It was also kind of funny that the only member of the family whose passport they actually wanted was the cat's. As soon as we arrived at the house, we unloaded the car as quickly as we could and took Freya inside. She wandered round exploring every room as though she'd always lived there. And considering, everything she'd been through, she adapted far better than we ever expected. These days she's perfectly happy, and because this house has an upstairs, she now has an even better view, and she can sit upstairs looking out and keeping an eye on the world outside. I'd say she's settling into Swedish life pretty well. And so are we. The next video is going to give you a tour of the house and the various issues that we found when we moved in. Because, of course, this house wasn't intended to be rented out because of its condition. But when you're about to be homeless with a cat, you're just happy that anyone's throwing you a lifeline. So I hope you subscribe and stay and follow our journey as we start exploring Sweden.